I want to go back to the story that we covered last week, of course, and that was the announcement about massive layoffs from Bell Media, from basically the news operations globally. I mean, worldwide. It wasn't just in the Hamilton area, Toronto area, whatever the case may be. I mean, the London bureau basically shut down. It's cut a lot of people off guard, and they will have some short-term and long-term ramifications, not just to the people at Bell either. To talk about this, pleased to welcome back to the program John Best. John, of course, is the publisher of the Bay Observer. He's been in journalism for a long time. I'll let him. Also, the former news director back in the glory days of CHCH and one of their incredible newsrooms, one of the best newsrooms in Canada back in their time. John, I'm glad you had some time to talk to us today. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Well, it's my pleasure, Bill. Nice to be with you.
Well, as a guy who's been there, done that for the longest time, as you have, and worked with some of the best in the business and hired some of the best in the business, what's your view on the state of the industry and what you're seeing happening here?
Well, it's, there's no way that it is not disheartening to see the entire journalism industry. It's not just broadcast journalism, it's print. Under this just seemingly death by a thousand cuts. I still believe that there's a place for journalism. That's the reason I still do it. I mean, I certainly don't do it to make a living. I continue to do this because I think it's important that there be someone in a community that maybe takes a little bit of a different view of things and tries to maybe get behind the news a little bit. So that's my story. But really, and you said it earlier today, I think in your comment, that the real key is local news. To be honest, these bureau shutdowns by CTV are not nearly as critical as the hollowing out of these local news stations like CKOC and CFPL London and Windsor. I mean, those are the places where the cuts really, really hurt, because if you're not running a robust newsroom that's keeping an eye on local government, you're just missing the boat. And I guess the other thing, Bill, I was reading a stat. Now, this was BC only, but think of it as all of Canada. Journalists in British Columbia are now outnumbered by PR people 18-1. And I would think that number would even be higher if you took the whole country into account, because think of Toronto, the number of organizations that are based in Toronto that all have robust PR departments. And this isn't to knock PR, because I did some of that as well. When you work in this business long enough, you do it all. But I got to tell you, it kind of made me laugh, because I thought, well, if journalism is dying, why do you need all these PR people to manipulate a journalism community that is really on life support? So it's kind of funny, but it's just a sad time, Bill. Until we solve the economic problem that has been created largely by technology. The internet has, it's a wonderful force. It allows the bayobserver.ca to exist. I can reach people through the internet. And yet here we are. It's also such a source of disinformation, such a source of news theft, that it's really, it's kind of you're trying to put out a pure product in a very toxic environment. It's a real swimming with sharks situation.
Well, and I did touch on that in my commentary earlier this morning on CHML, using the old Tip O'Neill quote, that all politics is local. All news is local, too. And it's the job of the journalist, broadcast, print, whatever it's going to be, John, to make that point and to tell it why it's relevant. Why should I care about what City Council did last night? Well, because it has a direct impact on your life, on your taxes, whether or not your street gets plowed. The same thing with federal government policies, with mandates. In the worst case scenario with pandemics and things of this nature, it's relevant. And I would argue that, as you just stated, because we have the internet and so much information, almost an information overload, journalism is more important than ever, because somebody has to sift through this and talk to us about this and give us some perspective on this. And some people on social media, on some of those pages, do a very good job of that. Others, not so much. And it's hard to tell one from another oftentimes. And I just don't think that the people that are making these decisions necessarily understand their commitment to the community. And it is a commitment. I know it's, they've got bills to pay, and you know, they've got shareholders. I get all that. But when you get a broadcast license, it's a pretty powerful tool, isn't it, John? And with that power comes responsibility.
Well, it is, and it certainly has been. And I think one of the reasons the legacy media were able to survive for so long was, frankly, barriers to entry. I mean, it cost $1 million back in the 50s to start a TV station, and hardly anybody could do that. So in Hamilton, really the local media banded together, CHMLs, CKOC, and Southam, who owned the Hamilton Spectator. They all threw some money in the hat and started a TV station. Starting a newspaper was even more difficult, the cost of setting up a newspaper. So because you had that exclusivity, you also had exclusivity of audience, and that made it a very attractive advertising vehicle. Now with the internet, you know, there are so many places people can get advertising information that exclusivity is gone, and all you got to do is flip through any print publication and see how few ads there are. And so the model of, I still think there's value in creating good journalism. I mean, the model, the way it worked was you create good journalism, and because you've done that, you develop an audience, and because you've developed an audience, advertisers are attracted to your product. But that's all gone out the window now because you can, you know, the internet is so much more targeted, it's more measurable. So that's where the advertising dollars have gone, and it looks like we're going to have to come up with some kind of a formula. You know, the newspapers largely are using paywalls now, but you don't, when you read the financial results, it doesn't feel like it's really helping make them stronger. Maybe we'll turn a corner with a more subscription-based kind of a financial model. I think that's probably the way it's got to go. But in the meantime, we're losing just some outstanding people. That CTV gutting, I mean, that just took out their Washington bureau, their London bureau, a very good reporter in Ottawa, and the one in LA I think you could have dispensed with, but you know, that's a lot of high-priced talent and high-talented people leaving the industry and not being replaced.
And this is not, as some people have characterized this, as you say, you know, traditional media, so to speak, against the internet. I mean, you know, Bay Observer is you know, it's on the internet. Our radio station is. I mean, there's potential here for a sense of cooperation and coexistence, really. And it can be mutually beneficial to both. But at the same time, I mean, there've got to be some rules and regulations about who's using content and who's using whose content. And that hasn't yet been sorted out, notwithstanding with this legislation that the federal government just tried to put forth. Facebook has already pushed back, and they're blocking some people from getting any news sources at all on their platform. So, I mean, until we can all get a common goal here, I don't know that this is going to get settled anytime soon to anybody's benefit.
No, and of course, Facebook tried that tactic in Australia, and they ended up having to revert to the existing model. It's going to be very difficult for the CRTC. At one time, was king of the castle. You know, people hung on every pronouncement that came out of Hull, Quebec, from the CRTC. But they have been absolutely useless when it comes to what's happening to traditional broadcasting, radio and television. And, you know, they seem to be a little more effective in controlling telecom, but they just don't have a clue how to manage what's going on with television and radio broadcast journalism right now. And to some degree, they're almost quaint. They're almost an anachronism. I'm not suggesting they should be disbanded, but they certainly need to be changed in some way. I saw a thoughtful article last week that was trying to figure out, is there a way out of this? And they largely argued that direct government support is not the answer. It's going to compromise the journalism. What they did suggest, though, was that if you're going to have a subscription-based model, whether it's a podcast or whatever, that subscription fees be tax deductible. Now, whether that would be enough of an incentive for people to sign up, if it was a 100% tax deductible, that might work. but taking $50 off somebody's income for the year, I don't think is going to be a huge incentive. But there may be a way through the tax system where it's indirect support from government, but it's not direct support. It's not a direct grant. The other suggestion they had is they said that, we've got to look at CBC. CBC is now operating all kinds of platforms that are competing with the private sector. And now CBC now wants to get into what you call sponsored content, and you and I know what that is. It's basically infomercials. CBC should not be in the infomercial business. Infomercials may be, frankly, a necessary evil in order to support some of these platforms, but CBC getting $1 billion a year doesn't need it. They've got a wonderful radio service. I wouldn't touch it at all, but their television and some of these streaming platforms are really totally redundant. They have no news audience to speak of in the local markets. I think they get something like I think their overall viewership is something like 6%. So it's not abolish the CBC. It's keep the things that are good, like the radio, and scale it back so it's more like a PBS and a lot less like being in every other media space. That'll help a bit.
Yeah, there's got to be some discussions here about some of these solutions, and again, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, it's not just about job loss, and that is for those people certainly a concern. But I'm talking about the future of the industry, and some guardrails and some assurances, I guess, that everything is going to be at least we'll ever attain a level playing field, but at least a more fair one anyway. More to come on this, as they say in our business. John, thanks so much for this today. Really appreciate the time.
My pleasure, Bill. Thanks.
John Best from the Bay Observer.